How is it the case we went from a society where belief in God was the natural thing to a society where not only can you not believe in God, but if you do believe in God, you're expected to defend that belief? The answer might surprise you. Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher's Bookshelf, where we consider a book from a philosophical perspective. Today, we're looking at one of the most ambitious books of the last century, Charles Taylor's A Secular Age. So imagine this. It's the year 1500. You live in a small European village. You go to Mass every Sunday. Not because somebody's forcing you to, but because the idea of not believing God really hasn't occurred to you or anybody else around you. It's like saying, do you believe in gravity? The question doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, fast forward to today and say that you're walking through any Western city. The person sitting next to you might be a devout Catholic, and the next person might be a committed atheist. The next might say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. The next might believe in astrology or Buddhism, or just not think about it at all. Charles Taylor asked the question, how did we get from there to here? And you might think the answer is obvious. You might think that the story goes something like this. Once upon a time, people were superstitious and ignorant. They believed in God because they just didn't know any better. Then science came along. Copernicus, Galileo, Darwin, and it slowly chipped away at the reasons for believing. The more we understood about the natural world, the less we needed God to explain anything. Religion today is just a holdover. It's what you get before you have any science. Now that we have science, belief is on the way out. It just hasn't finished dying yet. Taylor calls this a subtraction story, and he says that it's dead wrong. A subtraction story says that modernity is what you get when you subtract things, when you take things out. So subtract superstition, subtract religious authority, subtract ignorance, and what's left over is the rational, secular, scientific mindset. It's like chipping away at marble to get to the statue underneath. It's a compelling image, and it flatters modern people. It tells them that they're the ones who finally got it right. Everyone before them was just confused. Taylor says the problem with this story is that it's lazy. People take the modern, secular outlook as if it was the natural baseline. It's the human default when we don't have religion. But that's not an explanation. That's assuming the very thing that you're intending to prove. Think of it this way. Imagine you're trying to explain how somebody in 2026 in Oklahoma is eating sushi. You wouldn't say, well, people naturally eat sushi. It just took a while for all the obstacles to be removed. That would be ridiculous. Eating raw fish in the middle of landlocked America is the product of a whole historical chain. Japanese immigration, refrigerated transportation, globalization, food media, and shifting tastes. You have to explain how that became normal. You can't just say the obstacles to sushi were removed. And the same is true of secularism. Unbelief is not the default human condition. It's a historically specific achievement. It had to be built. And Taylor wants to show you how it was built. This leads to Taylor's real project. It's not a question of why don't people believe anymore? Because plenty of people still do. He's asking, what are the conditions of belief and unbelief? What is it about the modern world that makes unbelief a live option, when for most of human history it just wasn't? To answer that, he has to take us back to the 1500s and show us how the world looked from the inside. And he's very clear, you can't understand the pre-modern world if you take modern categories and just overlay it on top of them. You have to actually get inside of that world. Taylor says that in 1500, the world was enchanted. He doesn't mean fairy tales or anything like that. He means that the world was experienced as full of forces, presences, and meanings that existed outside of the mind and in the real world. The meaning was out there, not just in here. And the key concept here is what Taylor calls the porous self. Porous as in pores, that let in stuff and let things out. In the enchanted world, the boundary between you and the outside world was very thin, permeable. You were vulnerable to forces outside of your control, and those forces could actually get in. Think about, for example, relics. A medieval peasant didn't look at the bone of a saint in the same way as a modern person would look at a bone that is in a museum. The bone had power. It could heal you. It could protect your crops. It could ward off demons. The power wasn't a metaphor. It was as real as fire, and just as dangerous if mishandled. Or think about demons. A person in the 1500s was assailed with all kinds of dark forces. So melancholy isn't just a state in your brain, it could be some kind of malevolent force that's acting on you. The line between your inner life and the spiritual world was very thin. Now, in a society like that, where you have the porous self and the world is enchanted, unbelief is almost unthinkable. It's not that people considered atheism and then rejected it. The option just wasn't available. If the world is filled with different forces and spirits, then saying I don't believe in God is like saying I don't believe in rain when you're standing in the middle of a thunderstorm. You're getting wet whether you believe it or not. So something had to change about the self, about how people experience their inner life and its relation to the outer world. And that was the only way for unbelief to become possible. And this is where the story gets really counterintuitive, because the driving force isn't science, it isn't the Enlightenment, it's religion itself. Starting in the Middle Ages and accelerating through the Reformation, there was a powerful movement in Christianity to purify religious life. The idea was that Christians were kind of living a two-tiered faith. Monks and priests lived the serious religious life, while lay people did just the minimum amount. They just went to mass and then they participated in festivities. And then reformers, both Protestant and Catholics, said, no, we should both be taking this seriously. They wanted everybody to have a disciplined, serious, intentional Christian life. No more relying on relics, no more pilgrimages to sacred places, no more magical power of sacramental objects. True faith had to be internal, personal, and rational. So it's kind of ironic here. Think of what these reformers are doing. They're saying your faith has to come from inside of you, not from these magical objects. And they're doing this for deeply religious reasons. But notice the side effect. Every time you do something like that, every time you take away some sacred object, you disenchant the world a little bit more. You move the meaning from out there to just in here. You build what he calls the buffered self. The buffered self is the opposite of the porous self. In the buffered self, there's a clear boundary between the outside world and the inside. Meanings, emotions, and spiritual encounters don't happen out there. The outside world is just the world of motion. Nothing can invade your soul or your mind without your permission. So think about how a modern person perceives a graveyard. You might get a little freaked out. In fact, I had a buddy preach who lived, his backyard was a graveyard. And it was a little freaky at night, but you still thought, well, there's nothing that's actually going to get me, right? Well, not for a medieval person. A medieval person could be in genuine spiritual danger. There might be dead people that are still sticking around. The porous self then had no firewall. The buffered self has a firewall. And once you have that firewall, once you have cordoned yourself off from reality, then you might be able to say, well, maybe there is nothing out there in the first place. Maybe God is optional. Taylor connects this to a broader social transformation he calls the disciplinary society. Again, coming from this Reformation, people didn't just change their theology. They changed how they organized their lives. Work became more regimented. Time became more structured. Self-control became a central virtue. The old world of carnival and festival and periodic release gave way to the world of constant discipline and productivity. And this matters because the disciplinary society doesn't just produce more disciplined Christians in their faith. It produces self-contained, autonomous, rational individuals who could eventually function without God at all. So the very tools these guys were using to make people more devout ended up making the godless world actually possible. And so now we arrive at the modern world. And in the modern world, we live in what he calls the immanent frame. The immanent frame is basically the taken for granted background of life. It's the framework in which the natural world operates by natural laws. Society is organized around secular principles, and the default space for human life is this worldly. It is immanent, rather than oriented towards some transcendent beyond. And what's crucial is that everybody lives inside it, not just atheists. When a modern Christian goes to a hospital, he doesn't expect prayer. He expects sterilized medicine. When a Christian invests money, he doesn't expect the person investing the money to look for some signs. He expects him to look at the stock market. The immanent frame then is just the water we all swim in. It's the shared understanding that ordinary life operates on ordinary principles. Now you might be thinking, okay, I get people have changed. They went from porous to buffered. But how did that become the background of an entire civilization? How did the immanent frame go from being one person's outlook to the water everyone swims in? That's where Taylor introduces an important concept he calls the social imaginary. This is not the same thing as a theory. A theory is something that intellectuals write in books. The social imaginary is much deeper. It's the pre-theoretical understanding that people carry around with them when they look at the real world. Think about it this way. You can go to the grocery store, right? And you can do everything you need to do. You can go find what you want. You can bring it to the front. You can pay your money and all that, not because you read Adam Smith. It's because the market economy is part of your social imaginary. If a medieval peasant walks into that room, he is going to be totally befuddled. For a medieval peasant, exchange is personal. It's embedded in the relationships of loyalty and obligation. In the market today, you don't even need to talk to anybody. You can just go straight to the self-checkout line. So neither person here is theorizing. They're just living inside a background understanding of how their world works. That is the social imaginary. And Taylor's point is that the immanent frame is not something that people just think up or something that people reason to. Again, it has become the social imaginary. It's the background understanding that shapes how ordinary people, not just philosophers, experience their lives. And once something becomes the social imaginary, it feels inevitable. It feels like that's just the way things are. And now here's sort of the subtle part of the book. Taylor says that this immanent frame can be spun in two different directions: the open reading and the closed reading. The closed reading says the immanent frame is all there is. Nature is a closed system. There's nothing beyond it. If you think there is, then you're just projecting. You're adding something out there because you can't handle the emptiness. The open reading says that the immanent frame is real, but it's not the whole story. The natural order points to something beyond itself. There's a transcendent realm that the immanent frame doesn't capture, but is real. Science tells us how things work, but not why there are things at all. And here's one of Taylor's most powerful points, is that neither reading is the natural reading. Neither one is the default. The closed reading isn't what you get when you look at the evidence without bias. It's a spin. It's an interpretation. And the open reading isn't just wishful thinking for some people. It's also a legitimate interpretation. Both readings have anticipatory confidence, a kind of faith in a larger picture that goes beyond what the evidence shows. The atheist has faith that the natural order is sufficient. The theist has faith that it isn't. Neither is simply reading the data. Now, Taylor goes even further and says that the modern situation leads to an explosion of options, the Nova effect. Once belief in God is no longer the unchallenged thing, you don't get just two choices. You get hundreds, because every position has to be constructed and defended. And every position generates reactions, refinements, and alternatives. So you get Orthodox Christianity in all of its different guises of Catholicism, Protestantism, Orthodoxy. You get scientific atheism. You also get agnosticism. You get spiritual but not religious. You get New Age spirituality and neo-paganism. You get Buddhism for Westerners. You get moralistic therapeutic deism, which sociologists say is found amongst American teenagers. A vague belief that God is out there, but he just wants us to be nice and he doesn't interfere. You get existentialism, that there is no God, life is absurd and meaningless. And you even get people who believe in God on Sundays, but on Mondays go out and live like God doesn't exist. And this is important because it shows that the story of secularism is not a story of convergence, that we're all going towards one goal, one end rational worldview. It's actually the opposite. We're all getting scattered everywhere. And each person's position is destabilized by the mere existence of everybody else's. This is what it's like to live in the secular age. You're always aware that you could believe otherwise. The person sitting next to you at dinner could believe something totally different, and they're not crazy. They're just, your friend. So in a secular age, almost every belief is cross-pressured. No matter where you stand, you feel the pull from the other side. If you're a believer, you go to church, you experience the spirituality, and then the next moment you're out at lunch and everything is as if God didn't exist. You deal with the same problems and the same kind of responsibilities that your atheist friend does. And you might even hear a whisper in your quiet moments, is this just a nice story that I'm telling myself about God? If you're an unbeliever, you're haunted by a sense that there is something more. I definitely had this experience. I was an atheist, and I remember I was in the Air Force Academy, and I climbed, I would say, what was a large hill, not a mountain. But I climbed to the top, and at sunset, I looked out, and I had this feeling of what he'll call fullness. And I thought to myself, but I don't believe in God. And then I looked down, and the shadows were coming up because the sun was going down, like they just looked like they were about to swallow me. And I got this feeling of just complete fear. And I ran, and man, it was crazy. So now Taylor isn't saying that one side is right and the other side is wrong. He's just pointing out that this is the way we experience life in the modern world. And like I was saying, he has this concept of fullness, moments when life feels meaningful, when you feel most alive, most connected to something real and important. For Christians, that might come in prayer, that might come in some kind of worship service. For others, it might come in nature or experience of music. But everybody gears their life towards some vision of fullness. The question is, what is that vision? And can the framework you've adopted actually account for it? And Taylor says that the closed system cannot. He calls this the malaise of immanence. If the immanent framework is all there really is, if we're just material beings in a material universe with nothing transcendent, then there's a persistent flatness to things. Life can feel shallow. Achievements are hollow. You tick off goals, you experience pleasure, you contribute to society, and then you die. And then eventually the sun burns out and none of it matters. Now, Taylor isn't saying that secular people can't live meaningful lives. Of course they can. He's saying there's a built-in tension there in the immanent framework. And there's like a hunger for more that you get. And that's why there's this nova effect. That's why there's this explosion of people looking for different ways to find a framework that will explain that fullness. Now, to be fair, secularists have responded to this. They said, for example, this desire for transcendence is just a hangover from religion. It's a phantom limb. In a few more generations, it'll fade. Others say that the transcendence isn't necessary for meaning. And Taylor says those are serious concerns, but they underestimate the persistence of this hunger for the transcendent. And that explains why we keep getting these new forms of spirituality. So it should be no surprise that Taylor is a Christian. He's a Catholic, actually. But this book isn't trying to argue you into some kind of a faith. It's really trying to show everybody that the story of modernity that people have accepted is too simple. If you're a believer, this book gives you a challenge. And that is, how do you deal with your faith living in a non-porous self, a buffered self with an immanent frame? How do you proceed? It's not like you can totally restructure the world and re-enchant everything. So what do we do? If you're an unbeliever, you got a challenge too, and that is, can the closed reading account for the fullness? And then for either, I think there is a difficult question. If the immanent frame can be spun in a closed or an open reading, how do you pick? What would tip you one way versus the other? And is it even something that you choose, or does it choose you? In general, then, I think this book was fantastic. I think it shows us a lot of the subconscious assumptions that we have. And I always enjoy books that can do that can show you the things that you're assuming while you're doing your philosophy. And I think it's a critical book for understanding the modern experience. Definitely highly recommend that you read it. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Adios.